Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do a book haul revisit for the month of November. If you are unfamiliar with what these are, basically in my book haul revisits, I look back at the last 2 years of book hauls for the month of December to see how many of the books that I brought into my library I have gotten around to reading, if there are any that I have unhauled, if there are any that I'm thinking I may unhaul, and things like that. It's a way of holding myself accountable as to whether or not I am reading the books that I bring into my library. It's also sort of teaching me a little bit about how I operate as a reader and whether or not I am likely to get to the books that I am purchasing. It's an imperfect system because I still make a lot of the same mistakes, but hopefully there is learning taking place. And you can't really argue with that. I think there are ways in which I've been able to apply some learning from these to my book purchasing habits. For instance, I am able to understand that I'm usually able to do nonfiction on audio. I'm much more likely to do that. So it might not make sense to purchase a nonfiction book in a physical format, knowing that I'm likely to read it in a different format entirely, and maybe I don't need to take up space in my library. So I'm going to revisit December of 2019 and December of 2020. Usually 2019, which was my first full year on BookTube, is when there are a lot of books, really big book hauls, because my first year on BookTube, I went a little crazy and spent a lot of money on books. This is going to be the opposite. 2019 is actually very small and 2020 is larger. So let's dive right in. There were 3 books that I purchased in December of 2019. The first one I did read, but I unhauled it after I read it, which sort of tells you a little bit about the experience. It's Trick Mirror by Tolentino. I actually got around to reading this in 2020, I believe, as part of my judging for the BookTube prize. I did a fiction round and a nonfiction round in that year, and it was part of the nonfiction round that I did. And I thought it was fine, but I didn't particularly like it, and there were some essays in that collection that I did not get along with all that well, and you didn't quite see the point. Now, in book haul revisits, I don't talk a lot about what the book is about. I more talk about whether or not I have read it and what the likelihood is that I will read it. So if you're interested in more about what Trick Mirror is, if you're unfamiliar, I'm going to put a link to my original book hauls in the description box down below, so feel free to check that out. But basically, it's an essay collection. And I just didn't really feel like it cohered very much. I thought it was fine, but I didn't really dislike it, but I didn't really like it either. So it just felt like it didn't need to take up space on my shelf. So I traded it in, and I don't have it any longer. But at least I did manage to read it. The next one, Long Bright River by Moor, is something that I just haven't gotten around to. And this one I am considering an unhaul. I have not made up my mind about whether or not I will unhaul it yet, but I got this because it used to be that if I was looking for something kind of easy, mindless to read, or if I was in like a bit of a rut, or if I was feeling tense or stressed about something, I would turn to a mystery or a thriller to get myself out. And I don't really do that anymore. I've struggled with the mystery thriller genre, and I've talked a lot about that on my channel, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it here. But basically, I don't really like what the mystery thriller genre has turned into after Gone Girl. I feel like you get a lot of things like The Woman in the Window, The Girl on the Train, and not all of the books are like that, but it feels like the genre is really caught up in trappings that I don't enjoy, so I've moved away from it. So this seemed like a safe bet for something at the time, because there was always a possibility that I would end up picking up something like this to read. And I just don't anymore. And not only that, but I believe Britta didn't like this book. Joel read this and didn't like it all that much. And I'm blanking on who, but there was like a third person who read this and didn't really like it, which makes the likelihood that I'll get around to it even smaller. So basically, if you want to make a case for why I should try Long Bright River by Moor, let me know. But right now, this is going on the unhaul pile. And you can try to convince me otherwise, but that is the plan at this moment. The final book that I hauled in December of 2019 was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I had a sort of aborted attempt to read this in 2020 as part of my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge. That's also why I purchased it at this time, because I knew I was formulating plans for my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge, and I knew that this was going to be one of the books that I would like to get to as part of that, and it just didn't work out. My Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge was too multifaceted and complicated, so I ended up abandoning it before the end of the year, and this is actually the book that kind of broke me on that, because I started it on audio, not in the book, and I wasn't really into it. And a lot of people recommend this book to me, so I do want to try it again at a different point. I was reading it specifically because I had to for my challenge, and not really because I was in a mood to read it, and it just wasn't working. So I would like to revisit it at some point and see if I have a better reaction to it, but I didn't finish it. So that's kind of where we are at. I'm not going to unhaul it. I am going to keep it. I've heard a lot of really great things about it, so I would like, and I've heard a lot of really great things about Ursula K. Le Guin, so I would like to get to her again at some point. So of the 3 books that I brought into my library in December of 2019, I read 1.5 and unhauled 1 and have another unhaul happening, like, in progress. So if we're talking about results, 1.5 out of 3 read is pretty good. 2 unhauls is not great, but it could be so much worse. Let's move into the December 2020 book haul. The first book that I hauled for December of 2020 was Reckless by Selena Montgomery. And the reason I ordered this book was because I found out that Selena Montgomery is the pen name of Stacey Abrams. And she has since published a mystery thriller book, I believe, under her actual name. She's also published nonfiction, but I felt like it would be fun to support her side hustle and throw some money her way for the great things she did during the 2020 election. And here it is. And it's a romance novel. I didn't quite have plans to squeeze it in at any time. Honestly, it was more about just helping out Stacey Abrams' side hustle. So I'm going to hold on to it, and maybe I'll get to it at some point. But really, I just wanted to help her out, and that's about as much as you can really say. So maybe I'll get to it, maybe not. Maybe not. I've been reading more romance this year. As I've turned away from mystery thrillers, that's kind of the direction I've turned. However, I read LGBTQ romances. So I don't know if this would ever fit into that. But you never know. We'll see how it happens. The next book that I hauled in December of 2020 was The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. I did read this book. I ended up listening to it on audio, and I had really high expectations for it. And they didn't quite live up to those expectations. It's almost like Trick Mirror. I liked it. I didn't love it. And to be honest with you, it's been a couple of months. I can't remember a single story that's in this collection. And I'll compare this to my beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. I could tell you the plot of at least 2 stories from that, and I could tell you the way the rest of the stories made me feel. So that's not great. And I'm thinking that means that this is probably going for an unhaul anyway, because why keep it on the shelf if it's already fading from my memory and if I don't really have any strong attachment to it. And by the way, right now, I think in the vicinity of where Danielle Evans is on my shelves, I do need a little bit of room, and I certainly need a lot of room in the M's where Liz Moor would be shelved. So that's kind of forcing me into a position where I'm thinking I need the space, so maybe this is one that I'm going to let go. And I'll stop tapping on the book. What a fun little nervous tick I've randomly developed right here. The next book that I hauled in December of 2020 was Lolly Willowes by Sylvia Townsend Warner. This was really intended as more of a library builder, just a sort of classic book that I hadn't really heard of before then, but it sounded interesting, and I've heard about more since then. My understanding is that it is something of an early feminist novella. It's really short, from the 1920s. It's about 200 pages. And I think it's going to be an interesting book to have. I'm certainly all about a feminist novel from the 1920s. So it's going to stay on my shelf, even though I really am crying out for room in the W's right now. And I'll get to it at some point, hopefully. Maybe. We'll see. But because it's a library builder, it's something that I'm happy to have on my shelf, just sitting there for whenever I might feel like picking it up and getting around to it. And that's Lovely Willowes by Sylvia, Townsend, Warner. The next book that I hauled in December of 2020 was The Moor's Account by Laila Lalami. I've read 2 books by Laila Lalami. One of them was Conditional Citizens, and the other one's name is escaping me, but it was a novel about a family and a whole long thing. And I was less into the novel. I think the novel started great, and then the story kept fanning out, and the more it fanned out, the more it got weak for me. And I liked Conditional Citizens, but I didn't really love it. However, I hear really great things about The Moor's Account, which was also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and that really got me interested. This was also something of a library builder from that perspective. I didn't have any plans to get to it in December of 2020, and now that we're in December of 2021, I still don't have any plans to immediately get to it. But it is something that I'm happy to have on my shelf, waiting for that time when I do feel like picking it up. So we'll see when I get around to doing that. I can't remember what year this was published, but I feel like it would be a natural supplement to, it was published in 2014. So whenever I get around to doing the 2014 Pulitzer winner for my Pulitzer Prize project, I can't remember what won that year, but it's certainly going to be something that I read. I will probably do this as a supplement so I can talk about the finalists for it as well. So there's a little added bonus with that. The next 2 books that I hauled in December of 2020 were Sue Grafton books. So if you follow along, you know the deal. Basically, I was reading the Sue Grafton books a long time ago. I read the first one maybe 20 years ago. And over time, I was working my way through the series. I worked my way up to P is for Peril. And that's as far as I had gotten when Sue Grafton died. When she died, I decided to go back to the beginning and read my way through all over again, instead of just finishing the series and then maybe rereading it. I don't know why I decided to do that, but part of it was that I had gotten rid of all of my copies of her books because I figured if I was going to reread her books, I was more likely to read them as ebooks. So I would probably just get rid of my physical books, and then at some point I would pick up the ebooks. Well, I don't really read ebooks anymore, so that kind of went out the window. And even though the whole idea was that I would be saving space on my shelves, now I'm at a point where I just want the physical books back. So I've been sort of recollecting them and working my way through. And I got I is for Innocent and J is for Judgment. And I believe I just read H is for Homicide. No, G is for Gumshoe is the one that I read earlier this year. So H is for Homicide will be next, and then I'll be getting to I and J after that. I've read both of them previously. Haven't reread them yet. Will be getting to them fairly soon. But I didn't grab my copies off of the shelf because, it's this really specific case where I bought them because I'm rebuilding my Sue Grafton library. And it's weird to have them in with the rest of the books where I'm sort of holding myself accountable for whether or not I read them. But I will be reading them, or rather rereading them, at some point soon. Like I said, both of them are on deck for maybe next year if I read more mystery thrillers next year. So let's move past them and get to 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shafak. This was a finalist for the Booker Prize in, I believe, 2020. And it had really grabbed my attention, but it wasn't really available in the United States until after the Booker Prize was already over. I think that's the way it happened. And anyway, I didn't get my copy until the whole thing was already over and it had lost, but it still sounded really interesting to me. So I got it. And again, I didn't intend to get to it anytime soon in December 2020. So it's not all that surprising that I still haven't gotten to it. And I don't want to let it go because I still want to read it. So it's going to hang out on my shelf, and I will continue to try to get to 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World. I've heard a lot of really good things about it. So maybe I'll try to prioritize it at some point in 2022. But we'll see how that goes. You know me and TBRs, that we don't blend very well. The next book, the last book that I got in December of 2020, is actually 2 books in one. How's that for a double whammy? It's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and Maggie-Now by Betty Smith. I got this because I really want to read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I have never read it, never had to read it in school or anything like that. So I'm excited to get to it at some point. And my local used bookstore had this really beautiful edition that comes with Maggie-Now. There's an illustration on the spine. I don't know if you can see it with the way the light keeps shining off of the plastic that has been put on this. But it's just a really beautiful edition. It's signed by somebody in 1969. So it's a fun edition to have. I think I remember there being illustrations. Yeah, so that looks like the illustration from the side. Yeah, it is. The spine of the book. And I think there are a couple of others spread throughout. Here's another one. So just a fun edition of it to have. And again, this is something of a library builder. I didn't intend to get to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn anytime soon. I certainly don't even know now if I have intentions to read Maggie-Now. It just happens to be attached to a fun edition of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And somebody commented to tell me that they had read Maggie-Now and it was a good book. So maybe if I like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, I will go on to Maggie-Now. But yeah, this is something that I'm happy to keep having on my shelf. Certainly won't be getting rid of anytime soon. And hopefully someday I will get around to reading, because I hear really great things about A Tree Grows in Brooklyn pretty consistently. It's a book that appears on a lot of best of lists for the century in which it was published. A bunch of people call it their favorite book of all time. And it just always pops up in lists of great books in the English language. So it's something I feel like I have to get to at some point. And it did not win a Pulitzer, but I also want to do it as sort of supplemental reading for when I get around to the year that this was published, which is what? I think it's copyright 1943, and I don't know what would have won instead. But as sort of a conversation alongside what won the Pulitzer this year, like what were other contenders that were maybe overlooked, and it seems like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn would be a natural fit for that, because it also seems like a pretty definably American novel, and that's kind of the Pulitzer Prize's thing. So there's a whole conversation that I can have with this book in tandem with my Pulitzer Prize project, even though it's not a winner of the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I hope that makes sense. So that's the last book that I hauled in December of 2020. That's 8 books that I hauled in December of 2020. 2 of them I had read previously. 3 of them have been read overall. The one that I read in the meantime was The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. Right now, there are no unhauls. However, the more I talk about it, the more certain I feel that I don't really need to keep the Office of Historical Corrections on my shelf. So that is going to be an unhaul. And if we look at the 2 book hauls together, there are 11 books overall, and I've read 4.5 of them. And again, 2 of them were read previously. There's only 1 unhaul so far, but I'm about to add 2 and make it 3. So that's how I did with my last 2 December book hauls. If you have thoughts about any of these books, if you want to try to save I almost said The Left Hand of Darkness, but The Long Bright River is the one that I'm going to be putting on my unhaul pile. If you'd like to save that one, show your work in the comment section down below, and let me know what you think about these books. If you have recommendations based on this, all of that stuff, please let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.